I'm Kathy Cavalieri. I'm the president of the Westboro Historical Society. I want to welcome you to this evening's program. We're delighted you've joined us. The Westboro Historical Society was founded in 1889.
Recording in progress.
Okay. All right, let me just note that I understand we're being recorded. And this program will be is being recorded by Westboro TV and will be later available through their website and Facebook page. So yes, our society was founded in 1889 to preserve local history through research programs and the preservation of artifacts. Our headquarters is at the Sibley House, an 1844 Greek Revival home of the sleigh maker, William Sibley, located at 13 Parkman Street. And for more than a century, I want to say the Sibley House houses our collection of 3 centuries of artifacts of Westboro, dating back to the founding of the town in 1717. And for more than a century, the Society's mission has been to celebrate local history, to bring that history to life through our monthly presentations, Sibley House tours, and special events. And we've recently offered our members, at least for the time being, to contact us to arrange like an individual tour of the Sibley House. So I did do one of those this past Saturday. So you can feel free to contact us if you'd like to arrange for a tour until we officially reopen sometime when COVID dies down a bit. If you enjoyed tonight's presentation, we invite you to like our Facebook page, Westboro Historical Society, and check out our website, which is www.westborohistory.org. And you can also become a member through our website. So Bill Wallace is our speaker tonight. He's a native of Northern New Hampshire, and he's the executive director of the Worcester Historical Museum. He's previously associated with the Oswego, New York County Historical Society and Old Sturbridge Village. And Bill has been a part of the Worcester Historical Museum team since 1976. And during his tenure, he's been part of the restoration of the 1836 Greek Revival Salisbury Mansion, which is their other property nearby on Belmont Street, I believe, which is a really beautiful house that started out in the 1770s and is now restored to its 1830 condition and very well worth touring. It's a very properly restored historic home. And it's been restored, the Salisbury Mansion, as a gallery interpreting life in Worcester during its transition from an agricultural town to a major industrial center. And during Bill's tenure, he has also presided over the Worcester Historical Museum, moving from its smaller location at Wheaton Square into the former Horticultural Hall in the heart of the downtown at 30 Elm Street. Now, when not wandering in a historic graveyard, Bill can likely be found in a Disney property or in a library exploring his interest in the early history of the Tip Top House on New Hampshire's Mount Washington. So he's a man of a varied historic interest. And now I'm very pleased to introduce Bill Wallace.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening. We'll share our screen and we'll jump in to some made in Worcester, some little Worcester history. Some of it's doesn't want to work. Let's just see what's going on here. There we go. Some of it is made in Worcester, as the title says, but we like to play with Worcester first and famous as well, because, sometimes it's hard to say, is it first, is it famous, is it made in Worcester? So we're gonna play around with that theme a little bit tonight, that they're Worcester originals. And we might come back to Valentine's before the night is over if we have time. Of course, you all know the Worcester favorite, smiley face, created in December of 1963 by Harvey. You see here the tree from what's now Hanover Insurance, from the lobby when it was State Mutual, where you could go in and you could get an original smile button, see that nice classy handmade, have a smile sign on us. And of course, smiley face took the world by storm. It is the international icon for happiness and goodwill, and it's the Worcester original. And of course, every time we talk about a space launch of any sort, we always think, oh, that's because of Worcester. Well, it's a Worcester dream. I think it's a Worcester famous more than it is maybe a Worcester first. You hear regularly, because we think we created everything in Worcester, that Elm Park was the first public park in America. And of course, there are always 6 or 7 people to debate that. You could argue the Boston Common might be the first public park. And we know the Bushnell Park in Hartford was probably purchased with public money before this, but was it actually redesigned? So it's that Worcesterism of what's first, what's famous, what's Worcester made. Of course, one of our original firsts and one of the things we made in Worcester was peace with the British who had taken over the court system. And on September 6th of 1774, when over 4,000 militiamen from all over Worcester County gathered on Main Street, Worcester, to chase the British out of the court system. And how do we know all about that? Francis Parkman's diary. Francis Parkman from Westboro. He writes about it. He tells us how many soldiers were there from every town. You can read all these books on the Revolution. They all say, oh, bloodshed. There was no bloodshed in Worcester. This was a peaceful, and this is why it doesn't make the history books probably quite as well. And some would debate maybe it wasn't quite the first, but we like to think in Worcester it was the first.
I have to just mention that I believe you're talking about Reverend Ebenezer Parkman.
Ebenezer Parkman. I am sorry. I always call him Francis, and that you are correct. He is Ebenezer. And I apologize for that. I always call him Francis, and someone always fixes that. And I'm a Yankee. I'll never learn. I'm sorry. But thank you.
No problem.
And here, do you know who this is? This is Levi Lincoln. Levi Lincoln the first, not the second, who was governor for the longest continuous period in Commonwealth of Massachusetts history, but this is his father, who was for a short term the Attorney General for Thomas Jefferson. And what you see on the left is a drawing of the original courthouse, and you see that building today as a residence on Massachusetts Avenue in Worcester. And this is where Levi Lincoln argued for the freedom of Quock Walker, the man who was held slave in Barry. And it's one of the decisions that ended slavery in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It's a very influential decision, that with Mom Bet. So it's just another one of those Worcester firsts. We like to think we made major steps toward the end of slavery in Worcester. But the made in Worcester part really starts in serious form when the Blackstone Canal comes to Worcester. Of course, during that period, before the canal, there was a gun maker, there was a guy weaving a little carpet, there were a few basics. But you see here the Blackstone Canal that connected Worcester to Providence on October 7th of 1828. And it changed Worcester and central Massachusetts forever because it gave an easy access to the sea and worked in both directions. Raw materials in, finished goods out. Finished goods out, raw materials in, vice versa. It worked every way imaginable. And it changed Worcester and again, central Massachusetts forever. And here you see downtown Worcester in this historic painting. If you've been downtown lately and if you've parked in the multi-story parking garage for the DCU Center, this is the site you're parking on. This is the basin of the canal. This was, and you see the canal store. This is where everybody came. If you were a chair maker in North Worcester County, you brought your chairs here to send them down the canal. If you were a scythe maker, you brought them here, you took them down. If you were looking for some raw materials, they came up the canal, and they changed Worcester forever. That's the primary impetus in Worcester growing from a small town of about 3,000 people prior to the opening of the canal, and within 5 years of the opening of the canal, a town of about 13,000 people. And here you see Main Street with its Greek Revival houses and the success. And if you can see this is the site of City Hall. This is the first church in Worcester, and this would be the Old Town Hall. But with that connection to the sea, Worcester industries grew even larger. And before that, Ichabod Washburn was drawing a little bit of wire in this building built for him by Stephen Salisbury II. His connections and his success was so great. This is the North Works in its heyday. In the 1870s, it was reported that Ichabod Washburn was grossing $1 million a year. Well, that's very interesting because Ichabod Washburn was dead in the 1870s. So it's Washburn and Moen. And if you look at their books, some of which survive at Baker Library at Harvard, it's more like $700,000 or $800,000, which I guess in the 1870s, you could give them credit for $1 million. What the heck? And it was more than anybody was making for a long time. You know, this building today, of course, is the North Works without this wonderful ornamental roof. system, and where you go to the fix or to get your hair done or by whatever, and the mill pond that was created by Stephen Salisbury II to power this mill. The mill opens in 1834 after Salisbury goes on the grand tour and sees European mills. And at one point, Stephen Salisbury says to him, you need to buy this. So he buys it. He originally leases it to him for $1,040 a year. And by the 1880s, the Washburn Mowing Company advertises that it is the world's largest manufacturer of wire. Can we validate that claim? I don't know. But if you go to City Hall in Worcester, they say, we invented barbed wire. No, we didn't. We made barbed wire. We bought the patents, and this was the strength of an entrepreneur like Ichabod Washburn and his son-in-law Philip Mowen. They saw the future, and they invested in it. And they invested in it in Worcester. If you go across the Bay Bridge from San Francisco to Oakland, some of that wire is not replaced, and that's originally from the South Works of American Steel and Wire. And we even know, like many other wire manufacturers, they made wire for the Golden Gate Bridge, braided into cable once it got there, because the man who had to test the tensile strength of the wire was awakened at midnight one night, as reported in the front page of the Telegram. He had to go test the wire because it was so critical that it get shipped to California. Another of Worcester's famous creations of this early time period, and this is an Ethan Allen pepper box. And you see here the litany of all their sites. Worcester had an enormous gun-making tradition, and it burgeons at the time of the Civil War. If you go to the Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C., Ethan Allen guns are all over their weapons displays. It's always interested me that in Roughing It, Mark Twain writes, you couldn't hit the broadside of a barn with a pepper box. They were so bad. But they are part of the largesse of this period of time when Worcester is experimenting and making lots of things and shipping them out everywhere. What's the big invention is the monkey wrench. And we have all this stuff down here in front of it there. Maybe I can move that and you can see it better. April 16th of 1841, it's patented. The story is that the invention is actually worked on when the Coase brothers are in Springfield, but we like to forget that part because we're from Worcester. But they come to Worcester and they patent it. And here you see the new monkey wrench bench outside of Mechanics Hall and the new curator of the Worcester Historical Museum with one of the original monkey wrenches. Why were they making monkey wrenches? What was the big idea? Why were they so creative to make a monkey wrench? It's because the size of the nuts that had to be tightened on machinery were not standardized. So you had to be able to adjust. And if you can imagine, if you were working in one of these factories and there were 12 looms and your loom went down and they were all kind of working in tandem, you wanted to make a quick fix because you didn't want the whole process to shut down. Part of the story. The Coase monkey wrench, within 10 years of it being invented, there are stories in the Worcester newspaper of it being sold in China. If it's being sold in England, it's sold everywhere. And of course, lots of people build on that patent and make variations of it. We have the world's largest collection of monkey wrenches, I'm proud to say. Coase monkey wrenches. We just acquired it a year or so ago. It has one of 3 known examples of the 6-foot monkey wrench. What do you suppose they were using a 6-foot monkey wrench on? It took two men just to pick it up and place it. It was used to loosen the bolts on railroad wheels. They put it in place, apparently jerked the train back just enough to loosen it, and then they would be able to do it. And there are only 3 known examples that survive anywhere. Lucky us. This is one of my favorite inventions from Worcester, and I have to say it is made in Worcester, but it never really went big time. This is a typewriter. This is Charles Thurber's typewriter. We saw Allen and Thurber. He was the brother-in-law of Ethan Allen, and he creates this device. As you can see, he patents it on August 26 of 1843. And this is the only known full-sized example it's in our collection at the Historical Museum. It came out of a barn in Worcester. It apparently, there might have been more of them. The patent model is at the Smithsonian. And think for a second about what he was trying to do. I bet some of you, like me, had when you were a kid, you had one of those things where you could turn the dial and you could click the letter. and then it would advance the paper. Well, it's the same principle here. You spun the dial and you pushed down the lever. He says he's doing it for two major reasons. One is to make public documents more readable, which is why you have to read the patent paper. Public documents more readable. How many times as history people, have you tried to read something and thought, I have no idea what they're writing? The other one is that it was for people of physical and visual limitations. It's an early response to an ADA need. Worcester, Massachusetts. It's found in a barn in 1887. It travels the country as a phenomenon. People consider it, typewriter historians, I should say, consider it to be the prototype of the modern typewriter. Does anybody even still have a typewriter?
Oh, we have one question here. Was Ethan Allen the same guy leading the Green Mountain Boys?
Oh, he was not. Then they're no relationship. He also wasn't making furniture. So in the midst of all of this creativity, and those are limited examples, comes along the Mechanics Hall, which was founded, the Mechanics Association was founded in the 1840s. And it's the symbol of the transition of Worcester from an agrarian to an industrial economy. The men who are founders of the Mechanics Association were always at these agricultural fairs with their livestock and their plants. And they're moving into this mechanical field. They're investing, if anything. They have money, they're investing. And if they're not investing, there might be some of the people who are inventing and making things that are going to make Worcester famous. It comes at a time when Worcester is growing in terms of population dramatically, and lots of people are coming to town to speak. You see here the lecture of the Mechanics Association, which were then held in the City Hall. Not the one you know, but the earlier one that would have been on the corner of Front Street. And you see here Louis Agassiz is speaking. Everybody came to Worcester to speak, and that was part of the excitement. Was this enormous conversation. People with new ideas were coming to Worcester, and they were finding a population of people who really wanted to listen and were inspired by them to think differently, create differently, and establish differently. And one of the outcomes of that was, of course, in 1850, the women's right, and that first national political women's rights convention. How's that for qualifiers? It used to be called the first National Women's Rights Convention. Now you have to add political to it because of Seneca Falls. But this is Abby Kelly Foster, the portrait that hangs in Mechanics Hall. And you see here what we call the Commerce Building. And this is Brindley Hall, where that program was held. Women came from all over the Northeast to talk about what was happening in society that would allow for change, not just mechanical investment change, but also social change and equity. So the first National Political Women's Rights Convention, Worcester, Massachusetts. And I put this in because this is, I think, one of the great items in the collection of the Worcester Historical Museum. If you can imagine this being about 2.5 inches wide, that's a little daguerreotype of the Merrifield Building fire on June 14th of 1854. The Merrifield Building sat where the DCU Center is in Worcester. And this was the heart of Worcester industry. This is where if you had a great idea, you could rent space. It's an incubator building, just like we have labs near UMass that are incubators today. You didn't have to have capital. All you had to have was a good idea, a little money for some rent. William T. Merrifield had the power, he had the building, and he made the money. Well, it burns to the ground in 4 hours on June 14th of 1854. It's so important that it immediately is rebuilt by the people of Worcester. People invest, people give him money. And that is a symbol of what's happening in Worcester at this period of time when it is a city filled with mechanics, people who are wanting to make things, people with great ideas. But also, the Merrifield Building is important because it's powered by steam. It's not the Blackstone Canal. It's not water power that some miller might be stealing from the Blackstone or borrowing from the Blackstone and creating a little bit lesser passage. This is steam power. This is a steam engine. Merrifield gets new steam engines every 5 to 10 years, more power, because this is what's going to make Worcester successful. The railroads come to town. We always talk about the arrival of the railroads, but at the end of the day, it's all about steam. steam power. So if you can imagine standing on Main Street and watching this, there were multiples of these photographs, and this is the only one that survives of it. It's considered by some photo historians to be the second oldest news photograph in the country. And here is Joshua Stoddard, who responds to this theme. This is the creativity of Worcester, the things made in Worcester. This is Joshua Stoddard on October 9th or thereabouts of 1855 when he gets a patent for his music by steam, the steam calliope, or calliope as it would have been called those days. And what is he doing? He's literally trying to tune the steam whistles that are now all over Worcester's factories, signaling the beginnings of shifts because it's all about steam. He's using this new power to create music. At least he thinks it's music. In one of the very early accounts of the calliope being used in the 4th of July parade in Worcester, which of course was on the 2nd of July, and I believe the year was 1855, it's just before the patent. It says, the cows' tails curled and the pigs danced pirouettes in the street. I'm not sure that's a positive review, but within 5 years, he can't make enough of these things because they're all over every Mississippi riverboat. How many times have you heard a calliope, maybe not steam anymore, but a calliope at a circus? And maybe occasionally at a carousel, although those tend to be band organs, which are slightly different characters. But this is Worcester. This is the creativity of this great city that's saying, you know, we can do almost anything. Music by steam, who could imagine? And here's one of my other favorites, just to give you one more example. What do you suppose this machine did? This is Russell Hawes. He's one of those characters, I think. He's born in Leominster. He's a doctor. He gives up his profession because he wants to invent. And this is at the Smithsonian. This is the patent model for his envelope folding machine, which changes envelope production all over the Northeast in 1853. This is what's happening. Worcester people are being inspired by this new thinking, by this creativity. Not uniquely to Worcester, obviously, but Worcester captures it by leaps and bounds, and Worcester grows enormously as a result of it. Now, here's one of my favorite entrepreneurs, and you might recognize her. It's appropriate to the moment. This is Esther Holland. She is, sorry, my arrows don't work with that in the way. She's credited by many as giving birth to the Valentine. Of course, that's not the least bit true. This is a famous, not a first. If you believe that we invented the Valentine in Worcester and Esther Holland made the first one, I have a bridge, as the saying goes, I have a bridge in Brooklyn to sell to you. That's absolutely not true. But she's building upon this reality that the reality that her father's a stationer. She has a market, and Worcester likes these new ideas. So what happens to Worcester is with the train traffic and all these factories, it goes jugunda. By the last quarter of the 19th century, it's a manufacturing powerhouse. People are coming here, they're making literally everything. There's a brochure that goes, but someone has worked really hard to go from A to Z, and Worcester has a product in every one of those alphabet letters. We seem to make a little bit of everything. And that's the creative spirit of the center of the Commonwealth. Now, there are the first from Worcester. Does anyone recognize Grizzly Adams? Some of you remember that TV show. Well, we happen to have one of Grizzly Adams' bearskin outfits in our collection because he comes to Worcester. He's a favorite of Worcester. He's buried in Charlton of all places, and he leaves the hills and he comes to Worcester. Worcester's filled with people who are interesting, spunky, filled with great stories, and wanting to ask people in Worcester just to think a little bit differently. So he lives from 1812 to 60, and then of course the movie Grizzly Adams is a little bit later in the 20th century. And here's a man that you might be familiar with. There's a clue in here as to who he is. Have you been to Green Hill Park lately? This is Andrew Haswell Green, one of the grandson of one of the original John Greens. And this is the city of New York. He is the man responsible for the merger of the boroughs of the city of New York into the corporate entity of New York today. He's the man who espoused this idea, and he's the man who convinced everyone to do it. He goes to New York. He trains with Samuel Tilden. He is the commissioner of the Central Park project. He's the guy that hires Calvert Vaux and directs their work to create Central Park. And then he's memorialized with this bench in the park. And it originally had 5 elms behind it, one for each of the boroughs when it was installed, the bench in 1929. If you go to the New York Public Library, the Metropolitan Museum, the Museum of Natural History are all cited where they are in New York City because of Andrew Haswell Green's vision for New York. We don't like to say we created New York, but we do think we had some influence on the New York City of today. Made in Worcester? Maybe, maybe not, but close enough for us. And I think you're probably all familiar with the story of what happens in Worcester between Norton Company and Wyman Gordon, these big companies that take over Worcester's prominence as manufacturing enterprises. But I wanted to pick just one of them. And this is the Crompton Knolls factory on Green Street. Parts of this building are still there. If you've gone to the Canal District, if you've gone to Birch Tree Bread, you've been in the original Crompton Knolls building. They later in the 1920s moved down to what's called South Worcester, where Tabletop Pie is now building in some of their abandoned spaces or their reclaimed spaces. But in 1879, 2 loom competitors, Crompton and Knolls, merge to become Crompton and Knolls. And if you think about Worcester's role in making things, one of the things that we always remind people is that in a sense, Worcester was for weaving, Worcester was a little bit like the Dell of the 19th century. If you wanted a good loom, you probably bought a Crompton. So like if you want a computer today, you bought a loom. We were making some textiles in Worcester, but we were really powering a lot of textile mills. And of course, there were other inventors and other shops that were making things as well to support the weaving industry. But we use this as an example of Worcester's preeminence, that we are not necessarily making the product, we might be making the tools with which to make the product. And you see here, I showed you some patent models. We have about 150 patent models in our collection from Crompton and Knolls, or Crompton and then separately Knolls, because every time they made an improvement, they had to submit a patent model. They are responsible for major improvements in the weaving systems. Now, with a growing city and a city filled with manufacturers and factories, come the changes of the late 19th century. Did you know the first perfect game in baseball history was pitched in Worcester, Massachusetts on June 12th of 1880? And this is a cutout of J. Lee Richmond, the member of the Worcester's team who pitched it. This marker is on the campus of what used to be Becker College on Seaver Street. And
I'm not seeing that. We're seeing your 1879 loom Crompton.
You are?
Yeah.
Oh, well, how are you seeing that? Are you seeing it now?
No.
I am.
Unless you want to go back out and come back in. We're stuck on 1879.
There's 1879. Let's see if we can move it forward. Did it move forward?
No.
Huh. How about then? No?
Not that I can see.
All right. Well, let me close out of this screen share, and we will come back in on hopefully on that slide, and we'll see what happens. How about that? Technology is a wonderful thing when it works.
Tell me about it.
So let's see if we can share this from this point.
Maybe you need to close your file and then go back and share your screen.
I think we do have to close the file. That's what we were trying to do, and it wasn't even wanting to do that. So let's see. Isn't that interesting? All right, let's see what we can do here. Let's try again. Can you see all of that?
Yeah, now we've got your desktop, whatever, your series of pictures. Okay. Oh yeah, now we're seeing things.
Now we're good. Now we're
Yeah,
good.
now we're June 12th, 1880.
Now we're with Jay Lee. Where I thought we were before.
Okay.
This is a cutout that we make, that we take to different things. The story is that J. Lee Richmond was a contract player for the Worcesters. He'd been out the night before and got drunk as a skunk, according to his grandson. And he was totally hungover, and he pitched the first perfect game in baseball history, one of the landmarks in American history. And we like to think history is made in Worcester. Sorry about that. And here you see the Worcesters. Do you see that? Did it transition for you?
Yes, and we're also getting closed captioning now.
Oh, good Lord.
That's right, keep going.
I'm going to just cover that. How about that? Let's see if it works. Nuisance.
You go back to
Worcester's.
Casey at the bat. We missed that.
Oh, well, I'm going to go back to Casey in a second. Did you know that this is J. Lee Richmond? For some reason, he's called P. Richmond in the thing. But did you know that Worcester had a team in the major leagues for 2 years? The Worcesters. They're sometimes called the Ruby Legs and the Brown Stockings. We made more history there. But this is the real pièce de résistance in American baseball history. The most famous poem in American baseball history is written in Worcester, Massachusetts. There Is No Joy in Mudville was written right across the street from where I'm sitting right now. And was written by a man who had been working for Hearst in California. He comes home and he writes the poem and sends it off, and it becomes baseball history. And it's used by everybody from Disney to everybody else. It is Worcester baseball history. Another one of those first of things, something that's made in Worcester, maybe not necessarily in the same sense as a factory product. Candlepin bowling is invented here on Pearl Street. Now, people will argue about that, just like they argue about the first of everything else, but it is believed to be Justin White. A city that's now filled with people who want recreation. They want leisure time. 8 hours for what they will, a book by Roy Rosenzweig addresses this quite nicely, that they don't want to work 6 days a week. They don't want to work 12-hour days. They need some leisure time, and this is one of the outcomes of it. Have you been to the new courthouse? This is the Major Taylor Monument in back of the public library, but at the old courthouse, the new courthouse lofts is one of his practice bikes. He set the world record from between September 2nd of 1898 and August 26th of 1908. He was the world's fastest bicyclist. And he was from Worcester. He was representing one of the bicycle manufacturers, Ivor Johnson, not a Worcester guy. Born in Indianapolis, dies in Chicago, dies penniless after making tons of money. But he is a representative of Worcester business. He's taking these bikes out, setting world records. He's like the athlete on a box of Cheerios or whatever they put athletes on these days. He is one of the spokesmen for Worcester industry, a man of color, breaks the color line. Now, people will tell you we created the 3-decker and we created the lunch wagon, and we did not. They're really Rhode Island isms that come to Worcester. So we can't lay claim to those, although people love to lay claim to those of Worcester. What we did not invent, but we were the first place to commercially manufacture shredded wheat in the United States of America. In May of 1895, Henry Perky opens his shredded wheat factory. And he makes these pillows. He starts a cooking institute so you could be healthy. He comes to town and he tells people quite bluntly that he has a sluggish colon. And he's not talking about his ability to type or his stuck key on his typewriter. It's about the changing workplace when we get these factories, and now you have a tiered hierarchy. You have people who are sitting at desks all day as opposed to working like in the Merrifield Building constantly. Bodies are changing. It's also a time when people are concerned about clean food. And you couldn't get much cleaner than shredded wheat. So it is May of 1895, if you go down Southbridge Street and you look up to the junction shops, that's where he does it. He's here for about 6 years. He suddenly realizes, or perhaps he's encouraged by the Chamber of Commerce in Niagara Falls to take advantage of the new power and a little bit greater proximity to the wheat. but it is one of those first in Worcester. And I'm sorry we can't have a reception after this because of COVID, because I was going to make you all sorts of shredded wheat treats.
Mhm.
With
Can you,
these factors.
do you see the little line at the top? Can you possibly remove that about the closed captioning, or you don't see that?
I don't see that.
Okay, I don't know if I can remove it. Oh, I removed it. Never mind.
Oh, thank good. Phew. Thank God somebody can remove it. But with these burgeoning factories and these continuing new ideas come lots of new people, because Worcester was a city of opportunity. And I chose this example because it's not very well known. It's one of those Worcester first, that the first Armenian churches in all of North and South America are in Worcester. The Church of Our Savior, which is on Salisbury Street, across the street from the Institute Park Pond with Washburn and Moe and Wireworks, was actually really up on Belmont Hill, and is now part of the mosque. This is designed by Stephen Earle, the great church architect of Worcester. The Armenian population comes to Worcester because of the availability of work. At Washburn and Moe, they love the metal skills of Armenians. If you were Norton Company, you went to Castle Garden and listened for people to be speaking Swedish. You could always come to Worcester because of opportunity. When we did an exhibit with the Armenian community, 45 years ago, no, not 45, 35 years ago, one of them had a letter that said, come to Worcester, the streets are paved with gold. It's about the opportunity. If you had a good idea or you had good labor, you could work in a Worcester factory. And of course, this new traditions continues to Near East rice pilaf. I mean, I suspect, everyone is off this audience has probably had a box of Near East rice pilaf at some point, but here it is, its original shop in 1962 on Belmont Street in Worcester, Massachusetts, as people saw these new people coming in and thought, wow, this is interesting. This is better than, maybe more fun than being a Yankee. Who knows? And as Worcester thought about different cultures, Edward Thompson of Worcester went to Chichen Itza and the Yucatan. And did you know that this Worcester man for a while owned the sinkhole that we all have read about 1,000 times in National Geographic, if you're a National Geographic reader, where they sacrificed all sorts of virgins for good crops and better weather. This man from Worcester was the first person to excavate it. And here you see the Antiquarian Society with one of the casts of temple entrance. This is the old Antiquarian Society. Edward Thompson was one of the featured exhibitors at the World's Fair and Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893. He took the molds there and had them cast, and some of them are still in the Field Museum today. All sorts of things that he got from that dredging are available. Most of them are at the Harvard Peabody collection, but he is well known. And then there were other people like Robert Goddard, who thought, well, maybe I can take you to even more exotic places, like maybe the moon. And while he doesn't patent anything, it does have the first successful launch of a liquid-fueled rocket in March 16th of 1926. He's the man who proved that we can do it. He's the man who, every time there is a rocket launch, people at Goddard Space Center say, well, thank you, Robert. Sigmund Freud's only American lectures were at Clark University. Worcester, made in Worcester, part of it being made in Worcester, we always think of made in Worcester as commercial products, so part of it is thought. And Worcester was the only place that Freud spoke. He was part of a symposium with Jung and all sorts of other folks at Clark University. He's celebrated with this statue today. First perfect baseball, home run, excuse me. And I always forget this guy's name. He's a baseball guy. Maybe you know him.
Teddy.
Are you talking about Ted Williams?
It's Ted Williams, yeah.
Okay, and we do have one comment here from Michael Volk that he wouldn't have seen a moon landing in his lifetime if it hadn't been for Goddard.
Exactly. And we wouldn't have seen the Earth from the perspective that we have because if it hadn't been for Goddard. Did you know, I can't imagine anyone buys Appian Way pizza mix today. If you've ever had it, it's like cardboard with some red sauce on it. But Appian Way pizza mix is from Worcester, Massachusetts. We actually have in our collection the recipe from Frank Fiorillo. He's credited with making the first box pizza mix in the world. And Worcester continues to change things. The pill is perfected in Worcester. At the Worcester Foundation for Experimental Biology, it's sort of located in Shrewsbury, but we understand that. And then Humira. What television program have you watched in the evening that has not told you how Humira could change your life, either positively or negatively? It'll fix one thing, but 5 other things could go wrong. It's tested in Worcester, Massachusetts. It's a major product of Worcester. Worcester continues to be on the cutting edge of this new thinking as well as these more traditional products. And yeah, the first walk in space, that suit is a David Clark Company suit from Worcester. They don't make the suits after that, but they do perfect the space suit. We changed thinking. Here's Abby Hoffman. We're walking in space, but Abby Hoffman is challenging, from Worcester, is challenging people as a yippie to think differently about who they are and what they stand for. And maybe you saw the recent movie, but here he is as a much younger man playing softball with his buddies in Worcester.
Oh, Leslie wants you to know she has an Appian metal pizza pan.
Oh yeah, Frank Fiorillo would be so proud of you. Frank Fiorillo died a couple of years ago, but he told me the secret of making a real pizza is to make sure the oven is at 500 degrees when you put it in and then turn it down 10 minutes later. But yes, the moon landing. We wouldn't be on the moon if it weren't for Robert Goddard's dreams, probably. The struts of the moon lander were made by Honomatic from Worcester. Some of the reflective material is made by Fluxcon, the heat shields by Norton Company, and even more importantly, the David Clark Company headset through which Neil Armstrong says this is one small step for a man. This is called a Snoopy cap. This is in our gallery at the museum. This is the backup it's on loan to us from NASA. It's the backup from the moon landing. This is what he said it through. And even more fun than that is when Buzz Aldrin is with him. Buzz Aldrin's father studied with Goddard at Clark. Buzz Aldrin's cousins were all over Worcester. It's this Worcester connection that we make some of these things. The Honomatic products are kind of a one-off for this, and some of the other products are one-offs. But so what? Every city had a role in it, but Worcester has, I think, a little bit more of a role. And if you get the chance to go to the moon and you travel around on one of their dune buggies, it's probably still there. I like to speculate irreverently that probably Worcester has a lot more trash on the moon than many other cities. That the wire wheels for many of these are made from Johnson Steel and Wire from Worcester, Massachusetts. And then Felix Baumgartner, the tradition continued to 2012. When Felix Baumgartner dropped, what was it? I don't know, 7 miles or something like that. He's wearing a David Clark Company, Worcester, Massachusetts made suit. And I should go back to say, you see these headsets only in a different configuration regularly. They're green now. They're in the David Clark Company green. They say DC on the side. You see them on newscasts. You see them on Hawaii Five-0 reruns, David Clark Company, Worcester. And then this whole tradition of industry and education. In 2007, it was WPI who was authorized to have the first class in robotics. In 2011, they were the first in higher education institute in the United States to issue a degree in robotics science. An institution that started in 1865 to better populate these mills to create better products and a more solid workforce, a better trained workforce. But in the last few minutes we have left, I wanted to spend a little bit more time on something that's made in Worcester that's a little bit topical, because I want to make certain that you don't leave with a misunderstanding about Worcester Valentines. And since Valentine's Day is Monday, I just thought maybe we'd spend a minute taking this one example. Here's our girlfriend, Esther. She graduates from Mount Holyoke in 1847, and I'm sure her father looks at her and says, now what are you going to do? That's what my parents said to me when I graduated college. Now what are you going to do? Her father was a stationer, so he had access to all the materials she needed. And she had the space in the 3rd floor of the house that they shared, and this is what they made. It's an Etsy product, basically. It's scraps glued together. Imagine a group of women sitting around a table. Each one of you might have the lace paper, the other one might have the red dots or green dots, whatever they are in the back. Someone else might have the trim. You went from person to person to person. You just kept passing them along until you made one. You made a simple one, they made a fancy one. No two were ever alike because it was all what was in front of you at the time. This is Worcester industry at its very best. And here's one of my all-time favorites because it's one of the few that actually has hearts on it. So one of you has the decals, somebody else has the heart, somebody else has the liner paper, somebody else has an accent paper. And again, no two are ever alike. Her brother is going around the country selling the father's stationery. So she's got a built-in market. He just takes the Valentines with him. You stick in a verse and you're golden. Esther Holland is considered as the inventor of springs for three-dimensional Valentines. Mostly you see them flat because they've just flattened out through the years, but she's credited with that. But if you think for 1 minute that Worcester invented the Valentine, or invented barbed wire, or half the things that we claim we invent, or that we have 7 hills. After World War II, we had 7 hills. You just pick the 7 you like. Here is an 18th century Revolutionary War period Valentine in our collection that disproves this immediately. It's a handmade Valentine. Can you imagine? And you have to figure out, it's a puzzle. You had to figure out where the verses started. But if this is an 18th century Valentine, then Esther Holland in 1847 has missed the boat. She's not number one. Jill, the Tafts in Grafton, you might have heard some of the television programs last year. They claimed that they were making Valentines before Esther Holland, but there is no paperwork to confirm that. But what they do is Esther Holland and Jotham Taft merge like a lot of these other companies like Crompton Knolls, and they become the New England Valentine Company. They pool their resources and say, why are we working against each other in 1879? They're making the same thing. The only thing that's changed, like some of our other products, is maybe the material, a little bit brighter, a little fancier, a little bit more like the Gilded Age, but the same principle. And here's where they're doing it. Recognize the spot. This is Harrington Corner. You can get Dunkin' Donuts there and there. And this is where the New England Valentine Company just had a workshop. It's a craft shop, but it's a Worcester industry. This guy came back from the Civil War. I don't think he had quite the mustache then, but this is George Whitney. And by the 1880s, he's the commander of the Worcester Valentine market. And he's the real reason that Worcester is the center of the American Valentine industry, like where the Crompton and Knolls is center of manufacturing in the 1880s. He buys them out and he makes what? Basically the same thing they're making. It's a craft product. Maybe prints the verse on the inside as opposed to sticking it in. But in their heyday, when they're talked about as the world's largest manufacturer of Valentines, this is what they're making. So if you can imagine this Valentine, and here's an early one. All they've done is take all the components, the central figure, the decals, oops, my fault, the lace edges, and all they're doing is printing them. It's the response to the technology. It's the golden age of the printing press. So you take all those pieces and you can be a little even more creative with them. And when you can make one of a kind, now you can make 150,000 of a kind. And imagine how your market goes crazy. You print a bigger verse on the inside, you put a little decoration on the inside, and here's one of the teams that were doing it outside of the factory at Lincoln Square. Not a big crew, but here's, I think, a really important part. Look at those piles. This would be like going to CVS today and saying you have 20 birthday cards to give this year and you're going to buy them all the same so you don't forget what you gave to the one or the other one. You could do them, but you could also then go to stores like Woolworths and you could sell them a box of them. Like you could sell a company 500 looms if you wanted to. And you respond to the change like the people responding to the new ideas. When the postal code changes and they're allowed and picture postcards are allowed, Whitney jumps right in. And not only does he make Valentine postcards, he makes Thanksgiving postcards and maybe Christmas postcards, Hanukkah postcards, St. Patrick's Day postcards, George Washington's birthday postcards, because they seize the opportunity, just like we've been hearing about throughout the 19th century. And then you create a catalog. And look at these catalogs. They're just stuck in. And some of them occasionally, there are no records that survive for this company, but every now and then there'll be a record here like 1,500 Woolworths, 1,200 Kresge's. So we know that they're going everywhere, and they have agents all over the world. And if that isn't enough, then they make boxes of them so you can maintain the tradition. You'd buy these boxes, and inside were instructions how you could make yourself basically a 19th century Valentine in 1920. All the components would be there. When I first came to Worcester 1,000 years ago, there would be a lot of women who would come up to me after a Valentine talk and say, "Oh, I used to go and assemble those kits after school. That's how I made a few dollars." Whitney kept the tradition alive, but he also kept the experimentation and the excitement of the new alive. So he'd use the same printing press, the same designs, and make gift tags and decals, the same spirit of invention and inventiveness and the adventure that was evident in the 19th century. So here's the question. How do you know if you have a Worcester-made Valentine? They all looked alike, all those ones we saw. Got to look at the back. And this is not an invitation to go out and buy a whole bunch of rubber stamps and stamp them on unmarked Valentines. This is Whitney. What 1.5 means, nobody knows. Here's another one, another back one. Taft had a little embosser, like those things you could buy out of you remember the inserts in the Sunday newspaper when you could buy the embosser for your return address? You probably still can. New England Valentine Company. No one knows what the 15 and the 35 means. We don't think it's the amount of money because they appear on odd-sized cards. Some of these cards can be a little tiny 3 inches and some of them can be 7 inches. There seems to be no rhythm to them. And we can't talk to anyone who worked in the factory. And sometimes Howland had stick-ons. You look at the back of this Valentine. This is one that I happened to purchase for the museum. Here's the Howland. Here's the Nevco, so it's leftover stock. Somebody paid $5 for it, and I probably paid the $40 for it. I was dumb enough to do that, but it's a great example of the evolution of Worcester manufacturing, that sometimes they're leftovers, sometimes they're new, and a lot of it's about change. And if you don't find a mark on the card, remember that Whitcomb envelope folding machine? You might actually find the evidence on the back because this one is embossed Whitney 1 Worcester. See that? And if you look at the back of a postcard, here's your evidence. Worcester made, Whitney made, Worcester, Mass. If I ever run into you at a postcard show and I'm looking at the Whitney cards, I always look at or postcards, I always look at the back first because I can tell immediately which ones I want to look at on the front. This is just one example of how deep we could go into some of these stories. Sadly, most of the business records don't survive for Worcester Industries, so we can't go into great detail. We don't know who worked there, how many people, how many women, how many men, how many of these cards they made, but we do know that it was a spirit of entrepreneurship, innovation, and enterprise, that they were innovative in their thinking, responsive to what's going on in the country, and then forever innovating on their own. So here's one of those reproductions, I would call, of an early one, a new printed card using the old techniques. Whitney made, Worcester, Mass. So that's a little bit of an overview of some made in Worcester, some of its products, some of its fascination, some of its tradition, some of its excitement, like Smiley Face. We could talk long and hard about the impact of UMass Medical School and some of the innovations that they are creating beyond Humira. Here's Craig Mello and his Nobel Prize. If you read a book on Worcester first, you'll hear about Alfred Michelson, or is it Albert Michelson? I've forgotten. At Clark, who wins the Nobel Prize. Well, guess what? He wins it before he comes to Worcester. As far as I know, Craig Mello is the only person from Worcester to win the Nobel Prize, and it's for the good work that's going on at UMass. And here are more Worcester-made successes. Zara Cully from the Jeffersons, Mother Jefferson's from Worcester. Eddie Mecca was from Worcester. Curly Sue, Allison Porter, when she's winning the Voice, or she's in Curly Sue. Her grandfather was the rabbi of Temple Emmanuel. And J. Giles' band got its start in Worcester. They were students at WPI. And Joyner Lucas, the Maid in Worcester, sort of, the Worcester First and Famous, the story of what comes out of Worcester as a creative and exciting community is so deep and so varied, that it goes to great literature. Stanley Kunitz, the poet laureate of the United States, generally considered poet laureate twice, one for Library of Congress, another presidential appointment, but lives to be 100 years old. And he impacts the writing of poetry. And he's a Worcester man. And back to the comment from before, because of Worcester ingenuity and Worcester creativity as it's shared with the world, knowing that we were not the only ones involved in this success, we got to outer space and we got to look back at ourselves to understand this Mother Earth and its relationship to the rest of the solar system. But also, if you read a book on the San Francisco earthquake, they talk about how that we couldn't see ourselves. Now we can understand weather changes and we can anticipate things like earthquakes. And it's in part this Goddard vision and success that is kind of a Worcesterism. A little guy with his little dinky rocket up there, that's Nell. That's the rocket. His rockets were apparently all called Nell. We don't know what the Nell fascination was. Was it his aunt or a girlfriend he never told Esther about? We don't really know. Maybe it's just a name he liked. Maybe he heard it read it in a book somewhere. But it's a tradition of Worcester innovation. These are WPI students, and they're shooting off their bottle rockets on Worcester Common, who are keeping this tradition of innovation and enterprise alive. What they try to do on an annual basis, they try to get their Coke bottle rockets to go the same distance of Goddard's first rocket flight. They shoot for a hula hoop, and it's what we do at Worcester Historical Museum. It's what you do at the Westboro Historical Society, is remind people that this spirit of creativity and innovation are alive and well, and we all have roots. They all come from traditions that we sometimes forget about. That's why we have a Valentine contest with kids in the public schools. 5,000 pounds of glitter later, we have hundreds of entries, not so much this year because of COVID, but it allows them to be creative in the same spirit of Esther Holland and the Tafts and the Whitneys. And I would be remiss if I didn't end by reminding you that George Bancroft writes one of the first histories of the United States as we all think about who we are and what we do. He's a Worcester guy. He's the Secretary of Great Britain. He's the Secretary of England. We know the story of Plymouth Plantation. The manuscript is returned to the United States because of the work of George Bancroft. He's one of my heroes. He's the person who does what we do. He saves stories. He tells stories. His 10-volume history of the United States is obviously from his perspective, and historians have changed their perspective since then. But it's what we do. That's our responsibility as keepers of history. And of course, who's this? This is Harriet Merrifield Forbes. And this is Esther Forbes. A little Westboro connection there for you.
Thank you.
I thought we should end with them because they come to Worcester, and Harriet Merrifield Forbes publishes from Worcester the first serious study of gravestones in America. Everything before that had just been a photographic survey. She's the person who makes a serious study out of gravestones, just like Bancroft in history. And there's Esther, who wins, prizes for Paul Revere and the world he lived in. She's the mother of Johnny Tremaine. In that sense, these are the people who are the keepers of traditions and the sharers of story that are all, I think, so important to who we are and what we do. So it's a little introduction to Worcester. There's a lot more at the Worcester Historical Museum. As I said earlier, we are free in February because it's Valentine month. Tuesday through Saturday, 10 to 4. For Thursdays until 8:30. We do require a mask. We'll probably get to the point, like everyone else, of requiring some proof of vaccination. We aren't quite there yet. And we think it's a fascinating story, just like we know you have a fascinating story in Westville, and we're happy to share it. And I thank you for the privilege. I'm happy to answer some questions, or, as I said earlier, if I don't know the answer, I'll just make something up.
Well, Bill,
Seriously.
Thank you very much. Yeah, there are no questions at the moment, but I'll wait a few minutes and see if anyone has any questions. Oh, there's the smiley face. Now, you didn't really tell us much about foundation of the smiley face? Do you want to fill us in a
Well,
little on that?
I was whipping through that one because I was worried about time. The smiley face is a response to corporate mergers. I would say it's very much like what we've been experiencing in the last, 8-10 years in corporate America. The state mutual assurance companies bought controlling interests because they could never buy the whole thing in a mutual company. Two Midwestern companies, and Jack Adam, one of the founders of the Greater Worcester Community Foundation, was the VP. And he called his marketing person in and said, we need to do something about this. People aren't happy around here, because they, just like you would today, if you see new people at desks, you weren't sure what the future of your job was. So they called Harvey Ball, who had been doing their advertising work, and said, we need to put a smile on people's faces. So they asked for a button with a smile on it. Just a smile, forget the eyes. And Harvey said, in an interview we did with him, he said, I added the eyes. And I said, why? He said, because I knew if you didn't have the eyes, you could wear it upside down. And he just drew it. He drew it in no time. One pencil stroke was longer than the other. It's typically the button's left eye on our right. And he draws the mouth with an imperfect arc. And you can see the line wavers. And then these what are those? Those are convex ends, aren't they? Yeah, convex ends on the mouth. And he makes a few buttons. He draws posters. When he makes the posters, they're much more like what we would think of as a traditional smiley face. Straighter ends on the mouth, a more perfect mouth. But he makes posters, and they have a contest inside State Mutual. Probably couldn't do it today. HR would probably have a fit, because they would go around, they'd take a picture of people answering the phone with a big smile and say, oh, you have the biggest smile of the month, and they'd get a big button. And they put these stickers on all their advertising on. They made decals for the doors of their representatives. Before the days of color printing, they just used stickers. And with that little tree I showed you at the beginning, they claimed after about 2 years that they had given away more buttons than Avis. We Try Harder Avis buttons. Claimed they had given out more of them. Well, what happens is that by the late 60s, I will say, I think it's 68 or 69. Actually, I should stop for a second and say that the smiley face button doesn't even get promoted in the Worcester newspapers until 1967. I went to the newspapers, here, the so-called historian thinking, oh, it's going to be all over the paper. They've introduced this campaign in 1960. It's created in December of 63. It appears in the newsletter in January of 1964. Scoured the papers, convinced they're going to make some big announcement. It never makes the newspapers till 1967. It's not the big deal that I thought it would be. But what happens is David Stern, excuse me, of Seattle, Washington, happens to be in New York with his wife. He's an ad man. And there they go to a Broadway show, and there's a flea market on a table, and he buys a button, takes it home to Washington, Seattle, Washington, tells the world that he's going to use it in an ad campaign, use it in banks. Where State Mutual probably made 10,000 buttons, he made like 100,000 buttons. He had that whole Pacific market. They make wallpaper. Remember those things that banks would give away, the barometers that had the felt on them? They were supposed to turn pink or blue and change back and forth, but they only turned once and you had to throw them away. Well, they made those out of smiley face. They did everything. He's in the history books of Washington State as creating smiley face. I think he last time I spoke with him, which was a few years ago, he wasn't very well. It was in Arizona. And he's like, I didn't know any better. Then along in 1970 come the Spain brothers of Philadelphia. The Spain brothers had a series of card shops and dollar stores. And they took the design, they simplified it. They used a plate to make the mouth. So it's a perfect arc. They put straight ends on it, and they used more like ovals or circles for the eyes. And they used it on the back of their trucks. They used it on their bags. They used it on everything they could. The first inspiration at State Mutual was Smile, Yarn Candid Camera. Some of us will remember that show. Mm-hmm. The Spain brothers took a little different attitude to it, more like the Valentine you might send to a relative you don't like. This one I saw a few years ago. It said it was a railroad train and the character, and it said the Lovers Express leaves at midnight. And you opened up and it said on the inside, it said be under it. And that was a little bit the approach at Spain Brothers. It was based on laugh-in. So where they did smile cards, they also did frown cards. One of the birthday cards was a smiley face, and on the inside it was a frown, and it said, "Smile, it's your birthday." On the inside it said, "Tomorrow you can go back to your normal self." So if you ever watched Laugh-In, you know that was the humor. They made light switch covers, they made everything, and they had all their buddies put it on everything from drinking glasses to playing cards. They never licensed it. All they wanted was a better deal to buy it. They were on What's My Line as the creators of Smiley Face. When I called them up and said, "What about Harvey Ball?" They said, "Yeah, we didn't know anything about Harvey Ball in those days, but we now recognize that he really created it." Harvey Ball got paid, what was it, $56 for his first order.
Wow.
The Spain Brothers sold their dollar stores in and around Philadelphia for about $400 million.
Wow. Well, we do have a couple of other comments here. Michael Volk must have a connection to the Blackstone Canal. He wanted to know, do you know of any remaining landmarks of the Blackstone Canal in Worcester?
Yes, absolutely. If you take the walk, the canal walk that starts down near the old wireworks and walk toward Millbury, you can see remnants of the canal. And the canal was covered over, it was arched over. There's a photograph of it, and I don't have it handy, of them closing it over because it's an open sewer. And I know that there are people who've actually made their way into it because it's no longer part of the sewer system. And I'm told that if you dug about 2 feet below the below grade, just south of Kelly Square, you would hit that top of the canal. And that's one of the reasons why they haven't been able to make some changes in that area, because it's so high there. But if you were on further up Harding Street near the old Haywood Shoe Shop, you can see that there some of the windows are a half a story below grade, because there it's more like 20 feet below. There are remnants of it around. There just happen to be buried.
And a couple of final comments. We have Jean Baver is thanking us for, she's had the opportunity to be an audience member. She's in the cornfields of Illinois, but she's enjoying learning about Worcester tonight.
Well, Worcester's the center of the universe.
Absolutely. And our member, our Historical Society member, Joe Harrington, just wants to share with everybody his observation that the name Harrington comes from the many towns in England and Ireland that started as herring fisheries, hence they were herring towns.
Oh, sure.
And became Harrington.
And the New England Valentine Company was at Harrington Corner, named for William Harrington, who built that original building. Maybe your Mr. Harrington is a relative.
Could be. His ancestry goes back in Westboro to one of our Revolutionary War soldiers. So he goes back in history too. Well, I really want to thank you. It's been a wonderful presentation. I've learned a lot, and it's just amazing. I love the Valentine section. Our member and historian, really, Chris Allen, has a collection of antique Valentines. She may have shared with you, that are really charming. It's amazing how romantic and beautiful, and what a wonderful art form that was in those days.
And I will say that they're everywhere. I had occasion to do a program up in Maine about 10 years ago, wherever LL Bean is. I always forget what town that's in. Freeport, Maine. I was speaking to the Freeport Historical Society, and some nice lady came in with 3 beautiful examples of New England Valentine work that she had bought just the day before at the thrift shop.
Wow.
And I offered her like money for them, and she said, "Well, I only paid 50 cents a piece for them."
My.
And so they are around, and they're exciting when you find them, and sometimes they're absolutely pristine. There's some of our Valentines in the Love exhibit at the Worcester Art Museum right now.
Oh, okay. That's another one I plan to go see, probably, before it closes. That closes around March 13th. So yeah, that's one on my list as well. Yes, that would be appropriate for the Love exhibit there. And I just, for our members, I just wanted to let everybody know our next program. I have to thank you again, Bill. You've done an excellent job, and it's whet my appetite to come to the Worcester Historical Museum, which as I say, I plan to go to see the exhibit that's the Pretty and Powerful about the suffrage and the fashion. And our, believe it or not, our program is a month from tonight. Our next program is March 7th, and it's somebody on that works with you. The subject is Worcester's role in the American Revolution, and Robert Stacy, the site manager for the Salisbury Museum Mansion, the Salisbury Mansion, is going to talk about personalities like Timothy Bigelow, Elijah Dix, and Isaiah Thomas, and the events prior to and during the Revolution. So
Bob gives a great walking tour, and we'll start those in the spring. And I can tell you, I was driving down Main Street one Saturday, oblivious to what was going on, just not thinking about it. I guess I wasn't oblivious any more than usual. I just wasn't thinking about it. And I saw this huge group of people walking down the street, and I thought, oh my God, it's Bob. He's the Pied Piper of Revolutionary and Worcester history. They were having a blast. The Salisbury Mansion was originally built where the Boys Club is, and it was right across the street from the courthouse. So Stephen Salisbury was very engaged in all those activities, although we think he was a bit of a fence sitter. He's waiting to cheer for who won because he needed open trade lines. But
and I think that we're doing that program because Peter and Chris Allen took a walking tour with Robert Stacy and really enjoyed learning about all that Revolutionary War history in Worcester.
it will be a reason for Westboro folks to come back to the Worcester Historical Museum in April when we put out John Hancock's trunk from Paul Revere's Ride, the famous trunk that goes in the woods that's filled with seditionary papers.
Oh, excellent.
We have that trunk because Hancock's summer house was in Worcester. You'll learn some about this in the tour. That's where Hancock comes to Worcester after Lexington and Concord and waits for Adams and a few other people. And then they go from Worcester to Philadelphia.
Wow.
A little bit of revolutionary history we sort of forget in Worcester because of this great manufacturing success. It's all been, our revolutionary past has been superseded by great industrial innovation, enterprise, and success.
And Bill, can you please give us your email address?
Sure. My email address is williamwallace@worcesterhistory.net. It's really easy. williamwallace@worcesterhistory.net. And I bet I probably didn't put it in here. No, I probably didn't.
Well,
Sometimes
because we have the closed captioning, it made it on there.
Oh, good. Oh, yes.
William Wallace.
Are we lucky to have closed captioning?
Yeah, well.
How did I do that?
It has its advantages. Let me see if there's anything else here. No, I think that was it, the request for your email address. Well, again, I want to say thank you, everyone, for attending, and thank you, Bill, for a very informative program. And we hope to see everyone next month as we continue Worcester's story with Worcester's role in the American Revolution and your colleague, Robert Stacy, who I'm sure will be just as interesting and well-informed and with a good sense of humor. So
I remind you, if you come to the Worcester Historical Museum Thursday, Friday, or Saturday, the admission to the mansion is included. Of course, it's all free in February, but if you come another time, the $5 admission includes both properties. So.
Wonderful, and they're both well worth seeing.
So thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for coming, and we hope to see you next month. And thank you, and have a good evening.